Greetings, comrades, and welcome to Group 10's presentation on socialist realism, the propaganda art of the Soviets. Socialist realism is a style of realistic art that was developed in the Soviet Union and became a dominant style in other socialist countries. Socialist realism has as its purpose the furtherance of the goals of socialism and communism. Although related, it should not be confused with social realism, a broader type of art that realistically depicts subjects of social concern. Unlike social realism, socialist realism often glorifies the roles of the meek and working class and the struggle for its emancipation. Socialist realism was a product of the Soviet system. Whereas in market societies, professional artists earn their living selling to or being commissioned by rich individuals or the church, in Soviet society, not only was the market suppressed, there were few, if any, individuals able to patronize the arts, and only one institution, the state itself. The Soviet state, after the Congress of 1934, laid down 4 rules for what became known as socialist realism. The rules were that the work be proletarian, art relevant to the workers and understandable to them, typical, scenes of everyday life of the people, realistic in the representational sense, partisan, supportive of the aims of the state and the party. Socialist realism held that successful art depicts and glorifies the proletariat's struggle towards socialist progress. It demands of the artist the truthful, historically concrete representation of reality in its revolutionary development. Moreover, the truthfulness and historical concreteness of the artistic representation of reality must be linked with the task of ideological transformation and education of workers in the spirit of socialism. Its purpose was to elevate the common worker, whether factory or agricultural, by presenting his life, work, and recreation as admirable. In other words, its goal was to educate the people in the goals and meaning of communism. The ultimate aim was to create what Lenin called an entirely new type of human being, the new Soviet man. Stalin described the practitioners of socialist realism as engineers of souls. The realism part is important. Soviet art at this time aimed to depict the worker as he truly was, carrying his tools. In a sense, the movement mirrors the course of American and Western art, where the everyday human being became the subject of the novel, the play, poetry, and art. The proletariat was at the center of communist ideals. Hence, his life was a worthy subject for study. This was an important shift away from the aristocratic art produced under the Russian Tsars of previous centuries, but had much in common with the late 19th century fashion for depicting the social life of the common people. The artist could not, however, portray life just as he saw it. And indeed, people who were not simply good or evil could not be used as characters. All characters were poured into a heroic mold, sometimes termed heroic realism. This reflected a call for heroic and romantic art which reflected the ideal rather than the realistic. Compared to the eclectic variety of 20th century Western art, socialist realism often resulted in a fairly bland and predictable range of artistic products. Indeed, Western critics wryly described the principles of socialist realism as girl meets tractor. Painters would depict happy, muscular peasants and workers in factories and collective farms. During the Stalin period, they also produced numerous heroic portraits of the dictator to serve his cult of personalities. Industrial and agricultural landscapes were popular subjects, glorifying the achievements of the Soviet economy. It was argued that mere photographic replication of facts was merely naturalism, while socialist realism was distinguished by a will and purpose on part of the artist, and his recognition of these facts as part of a vision of the whole. The following slides shows themes that were common in Soviet propaganda art. Class enemy. The class enemy was a pervasive feature of communist propaganda. With the Civil War, the communists moved to massacre large numbers of gulags and otherwise promulgate a red terror to terrify the masses into obedience. The poster says, "Look me in the eyes and tell me honestly, who is your friend? Who is your enemy? You have no friends among capitalists." In Soviet Russia, propaganda poster looks at you. Contrasted here are two different ways of rearing children. The left column follows the life of a child raised in poor conditions, while the column on the right demonstrates the proper way. A large part of Soviet propaganda was devoted to educational initiatives, especially in the crucial area of healthcare. The revolutionary babies at the bottom of the right column are testament to the advantages of modern medicine. Peace-loving. This was a common motif in propaganda to show that the Soviet Union was a peace-loving state. Many warnings were made to stay out of any imperialistic war. The pictured poster is entitled "Peace and Friendship" and subtitled "Our Experience, Our Friendship," and features a Soviet worker extending his hand in front of a Soviet factory. Internationalism. Before Bolsheviks seized power, Lenin proclaimed in speeches that the revolution was the vanguard of a worldwide revolution, both international and socialist. Propaganda of extermination. Some historians believe an important goal of communist propaganda was to justify political repressions of entire social groups which Marxism considered antagonistic to the class of proletariat. It has been said that a major purpose of communist propaganda was arousing violent political emotions against the regime's enemies. This poster was published on behalf of the Soviet secret police during the infamous show trials in Moscow. Stalin went on to personally direct what became known as the Great Purge. According to the propaganda of the time, the purge was a cleansing of the rotten elements in the government. But in reality, Stalin meant to systematically suppress the voices of anybody he perceived as a threat to his own power. It's a scary thought. Propaganda posters such as this one could be used very effectively to keep the tide of opinion in his favor, despite the bloodshed. Anti-German. To the Russians, World War II was known as the Great Patriotic War. Less than 6 months after the poster above this one was published, Germany had abandoned its former understanding with Russia and invaded. Much of Germany's Eastern Front fighting over the next 3 years took place on Soviet soil. The imagery in World War II posters is generally far simpler than those of the propaganda campaigns of the 20s and 30s. The propaganda posters were indoctrination campaigns, targeted at certain groups of people, aiming to convince them of certain things that they might not otherwise believe. But images like the one on the right did not need to be complicated in order to have the desired effect. Koretsky, the artist who created this poster, received letters from soldiers on the front. They kept his poster folded in the top left-hand pocket of their uniform, next to their heart, just as icons had been kept by their fathers before them. Stalin himself declared in 1941 broadcast that Germany waged war to exterminate the peoples of the USSR. Propaganda published in Pravda denounced all Germans as killers, bloodsuckers, and cannibals, and much play was made of atrocity claims. Hatred was actively and overtly encouraged. They were told that the Germans took no prisoners. Partisans were encouraged to see themselves as avengers. Nationalist. In the face of the threat of Nazi Germany, the international claims of communism were played down, and people were exhorted to help defend the country on patriotic motives. The presence of a real enemy was used to inspire action and production in the face of the threat to the Father Soviet Union or Mother Russia. All Soviet citizens were called on to fight, and soldiers who surrendered had failed in their duty. To prevent retreats from Stalingrad, soldiers were urged to fight for the soil. Published 1 year after Stalin's death, the poster on the left reinforces the message that Soviet research and development of weapons and machinery is ongoing. Substantially funded by war reparations from Germany, the Soviets were able to build fighters, attack aircraft, like the one in the poster above. The red stars in the image above symbolize the pilot's kill score. The Soviet Union wanted strong citizens who could work for the benefit of the motherland. A training program was introduced in 1931 and included gymnastics, sprint, and long-distance running, long and high jumps, discus, javelin, swimming, cross-country skiing, and sharpshooting. The boy in the poster above is carrying a book of the training standards. By 1962, sporting events such as the Olympic Games had become hotly contested between the Soviet Union and the USA. Each was desperate to win in order to demonstrate their power and dominance over the other. In the 1956 and 1960 Olympic Games, the Soviet Union was victorious. The character in this poster has been painted to resemble an Olympic torch, with gold medals in the background. On the right, as dark clouds loom over the USA, the USSR bathes in glorious sunshine. The black thermometer shows the American industry rate, pitched well below the Soviet industry rate, which is displayed on the red thermometer. The information of the box at the bottom tells of an American economic crisis. In this poster, banners carried by marching Soviet citizens create a somewhat subtle image of Lenin's face. The caption reads, "People and the party are undivided." This famous Soviet slogan first appeared in Pravda, the leading newspaper of the Soviet Union, on March 8, 1953, just 3 days after Stalin's death. The Soviet government also created many socialist realist monuments. Lenin's plan of monumental propaganda is a strategy proposed by Lenin of employing visual monumental art as an important means for propagating the revolutionary and communist ideas. The plan had the significance of creating a large demand for monumental sculpture on a state level, and thus it stands as the origins of the Soviet school of sculpture. Noted sculptors from all over Russia, mainly from Moscow and Petrograd, were engaged in the task of designing monuments. It is important to note that the State Commission for Monumental Sculpture was determinative in shaping the mainstream tendencies of the evolution of Soviet sculpture, the prevalence of urban monuments, the criterion of social significance as a thematic guideline, patriotism, subdued expressions of emotions, heroic content, idealistic and artistic brevity, excessive pathos at times, and grandiosity of scale. The statue in the slides above is The Motherland Calls. When the memorial was dedicated in 1967, it was the tallest sculpture in the world, measuring 87 meters from the tip of its sword to the top of the plinth. The figure itself measures 52 meters and the sword 33 meters. 200 steps symbolizing the 200 days of the Battle of Stalingrad lead from the bottom of the hill to the monument. The lead sculptor was Yevgeny Volkatich. In 1959, a bronze statue promoting the slogan, "Let us beat swords into plowshares," was donated by the Soviet Union to the United Nations. It was sculpted by Yevgeny Volkatich to represent the human wish to end all wars by converting the weapons of death and destruction into peaceful and productive tools that are more beneficial to mankind. This is an example of Soviet propaganda art, even though it is located in New York City. The Soviet War Memorial is a vast war memorial and military cemetery in Berlin. It was built to the design of the Soviet architect Yakov Belopolsky to commemorate 5,000 of the 80,000 Soviet soldiers who fell in the Battle of Berlin in 1945. The focus of the ensemble is a 12-meter tall statue of a Soviet soldier with a sword holding a German child, standing over a broken swastika. The statue commemorates the deeds of a Russian soldier who, during the final storm on the center of Berlin, risked his life under heavy German machine gun fire to rescue a 3-year-old German girl whose mother had apparently disappeared. This is the Mother of the Motherland, a monumental statue in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. The sculpture is a part of the Museum of the Great Patriotic War. The stainless steel statue stands 62 meters tall upon the museum building, with the overall structure measuring 102 meters and weighing 560 tons. The sword in the statue's right hand is 16 meters long, weighing 9 tons, with the left hand holding up a 13 by 8 meter shield with the state emblem of the Soviet Union. Soviet propaganda was also presented through animation. Though not strictly socialist realist in style, this served as an effective visual medium to further the causes of the socialist state. We leave you, our comrades, with a short propaganda film called Victorious Destination.
Пятилетка — это утопия.
Утопия!
Утопия.
Not утопия! Мы это все предвидели! Провал!
Red.
Провал!
Провал.
Множатся успехи социализма. Забойщик шахты «Центральная Ингина» компания Алексей Стаханов вырубил за одну смену 102 тонны угля и вывез в норму 14 кат.
Невероятно! И дело техники не перешагнуть!
Вырезан Стаханов течение, ломая старый нормы.
Звонки, как птицы, одна за другой, пели летят над советской страной. Здесь в темноте городов и полей, жить стало лучше, жить стало веселей. Здесь в темноте городов и полей, жить стало лучше, жить стало веселей. Трудна страна и растет, и поет, песнею новые счастье кует. Глянешь на солнце и солнце светлей, ведь стало лучше, ведь стало веселей. Глянешь на солнце и солнце светлей, ведь стало лучше, ведь стало веселей. Хочется в день необъятной страной Сталину крикнуть спасибо, родной. Долгие годы беги, не болей, ведь стало лучше, ведь стало веселей. Долгие годы беги, не болей.